Vice Admiral Ibas is taking over in so many areas, conducted local council elections, started projects, presented budget, faced a lot of scrutiny. But legally speaking, what lessons have we learned? Would these be the end of the acrimony that we have seen in Rivers politics? Because it was the acrimonious politics that has led to the emergency rule, and the president said that has saved that state. Let me bring in quickly tonight to give us an insight Mr. Liborous Oshomo, who is a lawyer and a public affairs commentator, is live for us virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much, Mr. Oshomo, for joining us tonight on the program.
Thank you, Shehu.
Would you say legally, constitutionally speaking, that we have learned any lesson from all of this?
I do not, legally speaking, we have not learned any lesson. And I say we have not learned any lesson because one would have expected that before now, that at least the suits between the PDP governors and the federal government on the determination of Section 305 of the Constitution on whether when a state of emergency is declared, that the president has the right to vacate a democratically elected government, especially considering subsection 4 of that Section 305. If the Supreme Court had decided that one way or the other, it would have been very convenient for us to say that we have learned, legally we have learned a lesson because the law is what the court says it is. But unfortunately, that matter has been warehoused in courts, and if possible, it might become an academic exercise. So we have learned nothing. And considering the president's statement also, directed at political leaders and governors that democracies thrive under atmosphere of peace and security, one would have expected that statement should be directed especially at the president himself, because really insecurity in Nigeria today requires that we declare a state of emergency on insecurity. And truly, prosperity will thrive in a more peaceful Nigeria. So we have really not learned anything, legally speaking, because we still have this debate. Is it legal? Is it otherwise? Even though the law spells out that the president has the powers to so do. But there is a lacuna that the law has not been able to answer. The court has not been able to answer whether you can vacate democratically elected government. Because in the case of Plateau, remember, the suspended Attorney General went to court, and the Supreme Court heard that he lacks the local standing because the then military administrator, raised a preliminary objection that having been suspended, that he can no longer come to court as an Attorney General. And the court so heard that upholding that preliminary objection, that truly, if you have been suspended. So the court really didn't go into the meat of that case. And so this also, someday also we're going to have, such scenario, and then lawyers, senior advocates will be back on the burner debating the propriety or otherwise, whether the government has the power, and maybe the shoe might be on the other foot, and so that's why I said, to answer your question directly, we are really not learned anything.
So I asked that question because legally speaking, like you mentioned, it could be an academic matter, because I don't know whether the Supreme Court or the other court will go ahead, because the rest may have disappeared, and what exactly...
The action has been concluded.
Absolutely. So what exactly would the court be sitting on when the dispute has eventually evaporated? Now, the question here is, we will continue to debate it. The question again will be, can the president sit actually in a very critical oil-rich state like Rivers and look as things really fall apart? Does the president have power to declare a state of emergency? Does he have emergency power emergency rule power? If, for example, is health or security related, when the things were burning and the violence erupted, Should we have allowed the president to allow people to be killed? Are we privy to security reports in Rivers State? The president says he has the moral duty to be able to protect the country and is backed with relevant constitutional. So there's going to be a lot of debate in any case. But when the president said, look, the peace that we have seen in Rivers State is because of the emergency rule. Do you agree with him?
I do not agree. I do not agree that it is the emergency rule that had led to the peace that we are seeing in Rivers State. Politicians have their way of doing things in Nigeria. Politics will always take the top burner in as far as democracy is concerned in Nigeria. Considering the brand of politics that we play, politics will always take the center stage. So there will always be agreement and disagreement. And for me, this is very instructive. What has happened in Rivers State also should be a pointer to our state high court judges. This idea of pandering to the government in power at the state level, once the governor is in power, the courts will not, have the effrontery to deliver judgment against that government. And we also see it play out at the national level where courts, will pander to the whims and caprices of the government at the center. So this crisis really, if the courts in Rivers State, especially the high courts in Rivers State, had been up and doing, and you have fearless judges that would be able to look the governor in the eye to say, Mr. Governor, we disagree with this step that you have taken. All of this issue of declaring a state of emergency wouldn't have even arisen, and the issue of the state of emergency, bringing peace to Rivers State, would not today will not be a statement that will be made, because if you remember, I consistently had shouted and argued until the Supreme Court agreed that Section 109 is not self-executory. There's this argument that Section 109 is self-executory, and then we now started standing law on its head that a man stole simply because the law says the penalty for stealing is 12 years imprisonment. Then there is no need to try such a person in court, or that, once you commit murder, simply because the penalty is death, then you must immediately be killed, without the pronouncement of the court. And then you have courts in Rivers State supporting that position that there is no need for the court determination of whether those members who defected or otherwise, their seats are vacant. And then you find the state high courts dabbling into matters that they clearly do not have jurisdiction over. So when all of this happens, the impression is that once you have a governor at the state, then the courts in the state must give judgments in favor of that government. Once it's at the center. So I would largely also say this is not to take away the industry of our hardworking judges, but this attitude of pandering by judges also led to the crisis in Rivers State, because politicians will always do their thing. They will always play politics anyway. So this politics of self, politics of godfatherism. So at the end of the day, we saw how Fubara was gradually reined in, and then the piece of the graveyard that we all saw, the handshake, and then so if the governor had to wait for a declaration of a state of emergency and suspension from office for him, to know that there should be peace. And that's why the politicians will say, it is the peace that helped us to rein him in. But ordinarily, it should have been the court that should point everybody in the right direction.
Mr.
So
Oshomo,
I do not think.
Yeah.
I
was asking that question in respect of whether or not, legally speaking, we've learned our lesson. And I mean, if you look at what is happening in the United States, for example, in any federal state, you see that's that thin line between the role of the president and the federating unit. See what's happening in Los Angeles when Trump deployed National Guard. When he did in Memphis, similar. In fact, there are lawsuits as to whether or not why should the American president deploy on certain issues, whether he has a power. And the federal government is saying in the United States that it cannot look on and see crises take over the street. Look at what is happening in Washington, D.C. He said he wants to take violence and criminality off the street of Washington, D.C., deploying a National Guard. So the role and the responsibility of the man who is at the helm of affairs of the country and looking on when crises erupt in a state. But politically, I've asked you the legal question, politically speaking, as our politicians, have they learned any lesson? Do you think this could be a deterrent to see that if this has happened before, another president could do it? If you misbehave in your state or politician, take the people for granted, and the point that they allow violence to erupt in their state, it could be the precedents that have happened now, and it could replay itself. Could it be a lesson, politically speaking?
Let me first and foremost answer the question starting from the American angle. Yeah, that had been my point, really, Sheon. Remember, when the day the state of emergency was declared, you and I were on this program, and I said, constitutionally, the president can declare a state of emergency in Rivers without having to sack the duly elected, government in that state, because he was elected, with those government. But the question here is simple. You can still deploy, police to the state to maintain peace. You can deploy the DSS, you can deploy the army. They have been in Rivers in perpetuity. You can deploy them to those states to maintain peace without having to sack the democratically elected government. And then having to come to the politician, I do not think that the politicians have learned anything. Yeah, because today we've seen it happen in a PDP state because you have, a former governor who has one leg in PDP, one leg in APC. And so, to that extent, it is easy. The crisis in Rivers State is also not different from the crisis, that we see across board politically. It's just that of Rivers State, was so heightened to the extent that you have House of Assembly members that the governor did not allow to sit. In fact, at some point, he claimed that he could only recognize them, by virtue of his green biro. And so, that's one would have expected that if this had happened in an APC state, for example, where you have this seemingly crisis between the House of Assembly and the governor, one would have expected that if we see that and then we see a state of emergency, that's when I would say, yes, truly, there's fairness across board.
Oshomo,
but I do not think that the politicians have learned anything from what had happened in Rivers State, because if at all, sorry, quickly, Sheon, if at all, we saw it happen in Plateau State, we saw it happen in Ekiti State, and then the way it was going, it was obvious that it was going to happen in Rivers. One would have expected that all the parties concerned would shake their sword, but they walk right into it. And so power really corrupt, and absolute power, they say corrupt, absolutely.